you're pushing all the limits. And if you lock up the tires by trying to brake 2-3 meters later than usual, that could be game over. What I find fascinating about cycling is that the engine is your body. A lot of connections between car racing and cycling, and a little bit more about power. And then that's where Pogacar was distancing Vingegaard. Japan is a great country to explore. The cycling trips, you can go from one place to another and then stay in one of those like very traditional Japanese hotels.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Castelli podcast. My name is Søren Jensen and I got a fantastic episode lined up for you today. This one will take a bit of a different spin for the Castelli podcast as we'll be diving into the world of motorsports this time. We are exploring how high-speed motorsport drivers like those in Formula and Super GT racing stay fit. These drivers require all-round strength to compete in races, and maintaining supreme fitness, a good diet and regular exercise is crucial for them for staying sharp, healthy and happy throughout the long season. In short, they live a lifestyle similar to that of a professional cyclist. But how do they stay at the top of the game in such a physical, exhausting sport, especially with a season that stretches across most of the year? We are going to find the answer in this episode, and we'll be drawing parallels between cycling and motorsport, as many high-octane drivers use cycling as the preferred endurance sport to help keep them fit. And to help us dive into this topic, I have invited one of Castelli's Tokyo-based ambassadors to join us. His name is João Paulo de Oliveira, a Brazilian race car driver who has made a name for himself in Japan's premier touring car series, Super GT. If you're not familiar with Super GT, no worries. In this episode, we'll walk you through the differences between single-seater Formula race cars and Grand Touring cars. We'll go behind the scenes to explore why Super GT is one of the most exciting race car series, captivating millions of fans globally. It attracts world-class racing talents from both Japan and abroad, and features teams led by former top-tier drivers, including those from Formula 1 and the 24 Hours of Le Mans, among others. But no worries that this episode is going to be all about car racing. Joao's passion extends beyond the racetrack. He's also a dedicated cyclist who uses the sport to stay fit and mentally sharp for racing. Cycling also allows him to explore Japan's stunning landscapes, from the busy streets of Tokyo to the tranquil countryside routes. Joao will also share some of his favorite climbs outside of Tokyo with us, including the iconic Mount Fuji, and give us a first-hand insight into what Japan has to offer for cycling tourism. So whether you're into road cycling, curious about high-tech world of Super GT and Formula racing, or someone who has always dreamt of exploring Japan by bike or indulging in its delicious food, this episode has something for everyone, I promise you. Now, without further ado, let's buckle up and embark on a thrilling and an insightful conversation with the Brazilian race car driver João Paulo de Oliveira. João, a warm welcome to the Castelli show. First of all, please help me pronounce your name correctly, because I'm pretty sure I did not pronounce it correctly up to now.
Oh, it's a Brazilian accent over the A there. So João Paulo Lima de Oliveira. So, but JP is how everybody calls me here, because that makes it a lot easier.
So it's okay if I call you JP then?
JP it is. It's fine.
Welcome. It's an absolute honor to have you on. Your name has been on my bucket list for quite a while now, so it's fantastic to finally have you on.
It's a pleasure, and also an honor for me to speak to your audience.
I'm sure everyone here on the pod are as excited as I am. So, João, you originally started cycling as training for car racing, but within a few years you developed a passion for the sport. Nowadays, I know it's more than just training for you. It's a way of life. You even attend a couple of cycling races during the season, and you have qualified for this year's UCI Grand Fondo World Championships in Denmark later this year. Congrats on that, by the way.
Thank you.
Can you tell us more about how you got into cycling and how you use it to stay fit and prepare yourself for race car driving?
Yeah. Well, since I've been a race car driver, I've always had to maintain my fitness somehow. Racing car drivers have to do that, by themselves. Really, you just it's your own discipline that dictates how fit you are. You have to do something fun. You have to do something that you enjoy. For me, like I've always been, especially like earlier in my career, I've always been running, and running was okay, but I wanted to try something different that would also relate a little bit to car racing, because it's nice to do something that keeps you sharp, that keeps you at speed. And cycling for me was just the right sport. When I started cycling, I could feel a lot of things that were positive and that were helping me with car racing.
When did you start cycling and racing?
Well, bike racing very recently, but I started cycling, I think, around 10 years ago, 2014 or so, which is, already sort of halfway through my racing car career. So earlier, like I said, I was just running and doing some gym workouts, and then finally I discovered cycling.
Nice. Have you also developed into other disciplines within cycling? I mean, gravel riding, mountain biking, or is it just road cycling?
Yeah, here, especially where I live, around Tokyo, there is not so much gravel riding and mountain biking. I do have a mountain bike, but I don't ride it often. And it's just the challenge is to get out of, Tokyo and then find a place to do mountain biking. There's some great riding around Tokyo and, in Japan. I feel like gravel riding is still sort of, there's a few areas that are good for it. So you have to be a little bit away from Tokyo to do that.
How long does it take for you to get out of town by bike? When you go on weekend rides, do you go out for longer rides, or do you just go out when you have time?
It usually takes like an hour, because you can. The great thing about living in Tokyo is that you have options like the train. You can take the bullet train, and you can be quite far away within an hour, So, and together with a few friends here, we have some very convenient bike bags that you can just fold them, and you can put them in your pocket, in your back pocket. So you can take the first train in the morning, be 300 kilometers away within an hour and a half, and then start riding, and then end up in a different station, take the Shinkansen back to Tokyo, and then all you need to do is just really put your back. We remove the front wheel. We put the front wheel we just basically turn the handlebar inside, and then you keep it within the front wheel parallel to the frame, and you fold it. You put that on your shoulder. And you can take, be on the train, you go basically, you have some space to put the bikes. And then, that's one of the wonders of being in Japan. Like really, we're so lucky to be able to use the bullet train and then just go to different places and go to different climbs and, all kinds of riding. So it's really fun.
I like that idea of starting your ride 300 kilometers away from home, especially if it only takes you 90 minutes with the bullet train to get to the starting point.
Exactly, yeah.
You can go with your friends and spend a good day or two out.
Yeah.
And then you have all the social aspect and everything. It's awesome.
Yeah, I've done different things also, like cycling trips. Japan is a great country to explore. The cycling trips, you can go from one place to another and then stay in one of those like very traditional Japanese hotels, which they're called ryokans, and those ryokans you can, you have dinner, you have breakfast, you have like a nice onsen where you can relax, especially after a hard day of cycling. You get to the hotel and then you just get into that hot spring, relax, have dinner, and then go to bed, and so it's perfect.
Man, I want to come over and visit you one day. I've never been to Japan, but it has always been at the top of my bucket list. I'll definitely have to come over sometime soon.
Yeah.
Actually, I have an old buddy of mine, Katsu Kimura. He used to be a downhiller and also lives in Tokyo.
Yeah.
And he always says it was kind of easy to get out of the city by bike, especially for a big city like Tokyo. I do see on Strava that he still rides a lot. Maybe I should hook you guys up if you want to hit the trails one day with him.
Yeah, definitely.
Maybe in the off season, who knows?
Definitely, yeah.
He's really good and well connected, just like our friend David Johnson from Castelli, Japan.
Yeah.
You mentioned you like climbing. Which climb around Tokyo is your favorite and why?
Oh, there are so many areas, and there's just so many climbs around Tokyo. You know, like you can go like within the Tokyo prefecture, you know, within the still the area of Tokyo, about I would say 60 to 70 kilometers away. Sometimes we drive the car there on the weekend, so start early from Tokyo, and then we get to the parking spot, and from there we can ride 3,000 to 4,000 meters vertical, you know, within 90 to 100 kilometers easily, because there's just so many different kinds of climbs, long, low grade, like long and non-steep, or short and very steep. You know, there is the famous lakes area around Mount Fuji, where you have also the climbs that were used in the Olympics. The very dreadful Mikuni, which is you know, I think it's a 7-kilometer climb at like over 10%, and that's a very, very tough climb. But of course, Mount Fuji is a very iconic climb, and you can climb it from many different sides. So that makes it really interesting. You know, if you have a steeper side, which is the Asami line, and then you have the Subashiri line, and so you have all these different lines, or basically roads, which you can climb Mount Fuji from. And there's actually a Fuji hill climb competition, which takes place on the Subaru line, which is basically the main road that accesses the 5th station of Mount Fuji, where people that will go to Mount Fuji to hike to the top, they will go by car sometimes to the 5th station, park their car there, and then climb to the top. So this is the road that they use for the competition.
Do you know what the best time is on that climb? I'm sure you could probably look it up on Strava. I don't know if you're on Strava, by the way, JP.
I am on Strava, yeah. So that is a 50, I think the KOM there is like 57 minutes or so. Yeah, I've done it 2 years ago. I've done that, and I did it in an hour and 5.
Wow,
an hour
that's
and 6,
a very good
I believe.
time.
An hour 5, an hour 6. But yeah, I mean, you know, it's actually like the way that the race is organized. You start off with the elite riders riding first, and we cannot ride on that group because those are, you know, like a very small pack, maybe like 60 to 80 riders riding that pack. And then after, they start releasing waves of riders, and it's basically a time trial. As soon as you cross a line at the bottom, there is a toll gate where the cars go through. So at that toll gate, there is a line, and that's basically a time trial from that line to the line at the top. Because obviously we cannot start 15,000, because actually 2 years ago it was 15,000 people doing that.
Wow, that's
it's
insane.
Just unreal.
When is that taking place?
That is, I believe it's in June. Yeah, it's in June. Yeah. It's just early. Yeah, it's early in the summer, like it's right after spring.
Also before it gets too humid and hot.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so it's just, I think it's just the right time to go up Mount Fuji. It's either in June, or I would say late September, very early October probably, but like late, September or so. Like right now, it's just very hot and very humid.
So here's what I'll do, JP. I'll include a few links to your social handles, including Strava, in the podcast notes. This way people can look you up, follow you, and more importantly, see where you're riding.
Yeah.
They might get some inspiration if they're already living in Japan or if they're planning to visit like myself. So they easily can check out some of your great places to ride a bike.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
What I also hear from you is the way you got into cycling and the progression and addiction you developed from riding are similar to what every one of us are experiencing. You stand at hill, don't feel like a hill anymore. You get faster, you get stronger, and you learn how much the human body can actually handle. If you ride in the right zones, both in training and racing, live a healthy lifestyle, pay attention to recovery, get your sleep at night, eat well, listen to your body signals, you can push your body further than you might think. It all comes down to those little things that matters. We see that in professional cycling of today.
For sure, yeah. And that's part of, I think, when I try to connect car racing and cycling, I think, one of the things that come to mind is like you're competing against yourself. In car racing, you're competing mostly against yourself. If you're confident and if you believe that you're good enough, your competition is mostly against your best self. And if you can top that every time, if you can always be at top of your game, you're always going to be, winning or thereabouts, or you're going to be very, very close. And I think that's key to being successful, in any sports, really. I think it's understanding how far you can go, how much you can push, and being confident. I think those are the very strong elements.
JP, let's revisit the topic of cycling and how you maintain your fitness for high-level motorsports racing in a bit. For now, let's dive into car racing and your journey into it. You've been one of the most successful car race drivers in Japan over the last decade. You have had a wonderful career so far. You started racing Formula 3 back in Brazil in 1999, and shortly after, you moved to Europe at the young age of 19. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's correct, yeah.
After finding success in Europe, you made the move to Japan in 2004, which was 20 years ago. Less than 2 years later, you transitioned from Formula 3 to Super GT.
Yeah.
I mean, that's a long and very impressive career racing some of the biggest cars in the sport.
Yeah.
You have really had a successful run. But let's start with a brief introduction about where you're from.
Yeah.
Because I'm sure some people are curious. We mentioned Brazil earlier and how you got into car racing. So let's dive into that part first.
So I'm from São Paulo, Brazil. Initially, I was doing some different sports. I was into soccer, for example, which I think nearly every Brazilian is.
Yeah, I was just about to say that.
And my brother, a certain weekend, we're hanging out on the weekends. We're always watching Formula 1 races because Ayrton Senna was, our big hero, a big Brazilian hero. And every Sunday mornings, my dad would come wake me and my brother up because due to the time differences in Europe would be just after lunch, but Brazil would be early in the morning. My dad would come to bed and wake me and my brother up and say, hey, Senna is going to race now. And we would come to the living room, rush there, watch the race, and he would usually win. He was winning a lot those days. And we had, some sort of tune that used to play at the end of the race, which was sort of like a celebratory tune to Ayrton Senna's victory. And that was always stuck in our minds and so on. So, but that aside, my brother is the one who initially asked my dad to start racing. So he started go-karting for 2 years, and my brother is actually 1 year younger than me. So he started when he was about 13, and I was following him for about 2 years. I was going to the track, just basically supporting him. I was watching and telling him what others were doing that he should be trying to do or do better, and I was a little bit tough on some points, you have to do this and that, and then so it got to a point where my dad was like, you should try it for yourself and see how tough it is, because it's only driving you will see. And then I started driving, and quickly my career just took off. And as I was older than my brother, I was able to jump into car racing. From go-karts, you go into car racing, and you can only go into car racing if you're in those days you could only go into car racing when you're over 16, and I was the first to get there. So then I started car racing, and quickly the career took off, and the rest is history. So
things really took off when you left for Europe. If I'm not mistaken, did you move to Switzerland first?
For the first year I lived in Switzerland.
But how did you end up in Switzerland? Because as you mentioned, in Brazil, like in many other countries, every young kid starts playing soccer. And I assume there are scouts going from village to village looking for the next Ronaldo. Does something similar exist in motorsports, where you get scouted by someone to go to Europe? How did that come about?
Yeah, it's not in the same level of soccer, but we do have some certain skilled people to see talent. And I was quite lucky that there was one man who is a late friend of mine, Chico, who he earlier in the career of Ayrton Senna and Nelson Piquet, another Brazilian very successful Formula One driver, he helped them both in their careers in Formula One. And he came to me one day and he said, "Hey, I like how you drive, and I would like to help you if I can in some way." And he was the one who helped me pick up some sponsorship to then move to Europe, because the move to Europe, it adds up, the costs of living in Europe, and also you have to bring some sort of sponsorship into the team. That's the way car racing works. So it's a very expensive sport when you go on your own. You must have sponsors. You must have, these days also there's a lot of Formula One teams that are more involved in the junior categories. They're like investing in some young talent and picking up their junior drivers from early on, which is, it's something that has developed in car racing within the last 10 to 15 years. It became more evident with the Formula One teams. So but in my case especially, I was lucky to have Chico on my side and someone who helped me a lot.
How did your family cope with you moving from Brazil to Europe? I imagine they had to trust your decision, especially since you were young and eager to follow your passion and explore new opportunities.
Absolutely.
So after making that big move, you ended up in Switzerland and began racing in Formula 3. I think it was in 2003 that you won the German Formula 3 championship, right?
Yeah.
From what I understand, this is considered the most prestigious Formula 3 championship you can win.
Yeah, at the time, there were different F3 national F3 championships all around Europe. So there was the British F3 championship, which produced a lot of Formula One drivers. And then the German F3 championship, which also produced a lot of Formula One drivers. And there was a French Formula 3 championship and then an Italian. But then they all mixed up at some point. It was from 2004, I believe, 5, that then they became the European F3 championship. And then, you would travel around Europe doing the European FIA Formula 3 series. So, winning the German F3 championship was basically the big trampoline in my career to then, have access to other things, and especially coming to Japan. That opened the door to come here.
That championship win marked the start of your move to Japan the following year.
Yeah.
Do you think your European experience helped prepare you for the transition to Japan?
Yeah.
I mean, considering the cultural differences, like the contrast between Brazil's warm, welcoming nature and Japan's more reserved approach, how did that affect your adaptation to life and racing in Japan?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that was because Europe. Nowadays Europe is kind of the halfway from Brazil to Japan. Europe would be halfway in between, and it's a really important step not to do a complete 180, because Japan and Brazil, that's a drastic change. Europe taught me a lot, living alone, having discipline, being prepared for this world, which is a tough world, because in this kind of sport you have to be very sharp. You have to be a little bit selfish in some ways. You're competing against everyone, including your teammate. And it's a very demanding mental sport, which I think dealing with those stresses can be challenging, especially when you're away from family, friends, and your safety zone.
You've been living in Japan for 20 years, and it has become your home. You're currently based in Tokyo.
Japan is my home, yeah.
But when you first arrived 2 decades ago, did you move directly to Tokyo, or did you start out in a different city like Kyoto?
Exactly, yeah. So the first year, when I first came to Japan, I was driving for a team that was based in Kyoto. So, you would think like, oh, living in Kyoto must be great. It's a beautiful city. It's very touristic also. And it was my first year in Japan. So I was like, I would say not enjoying as much life there, because I was just on my own the whole time. I did not have any friends coming to Japan. A very big cultural shock. And, especially when it comes down to food and finding places to eat and all of that. And also, remember 20 years ago, it's not like nowadays you can open your phone and get recommendations for a best restaurant around you or any of those things, so you had to basically go and open doors and see the world as it was in front of you, and I think so that was for me a cool experience, living in Kyoto. And then from Kyoto I moved to Gotemba, much closer to Tokyo, but also near Mount Fuji, which is where a lot of the motorsport teams are based in Japan. And then from there, I came to Tokyo, because then I started to make friends in Tokyo. I had people, people I know. So I was like, okay, well, maybe it's the right thing to do, to have a place where, life will be a little bit, just busier, and we'll have more entertainment.
I would like to dive a bit deeper into your story without going into too much detail right now. After you arrived in Japan, you quickly found yourself racing with Japanese engines.
Yeah.
Just 2 years later, you transitioned to Super GT. What inspired you to pursue a career in Super GT after already achieving success in Formula 3?
Well, GT is basically the highest level of car racing in Japan. It's the peak of motorsports here. Super GT is well known around the world. There are fans in Europe, there are fans in the US, fans in South America, fans everywhere in Australia, because of the cars are very unique. They're the fastest GT cars in the world. And it's fascinating because you have 2 different classes racing in the same race. So there's, a lot of action, a lot of drama. There's lots of different manufacturers, European manufacturers, Japanese manufacturers. And so that makes it really exciting. And it's a very high level racing series. So we had a bunch of Formula 1 drivers come to Japan racing Super GT after when they were at the final phase of their Formula One career, then they made the move to come to Japan. Like Jenson Button, he won the Formula One World Championship, and a few years later, he's racing here in Super GT. He was racing with me. Heikki Kovalainen also racing with McLaren for a while, and then he came to Japan racing Super GT. And Italian driver Liuzzi Vitantonio as well. He did not stay in Formula One for long, but he was in Formula One, and then a couple years came to Japan and raced Super GT. So Super GT has always been sort of a car where Formula One drivers love to experience someday, because it's a roof car, and you would never imagine that a car with a roof can go that fast, can corner that fast, can brake that late, so it's almost unthinkable for a lot of drivers that a car can be that fast when you have a roof.
Exactly. The cars you drive in GT are heavily modified production cars known as Grand Touring cars, designed for high-speed endurance.
Yeah.
So this is quite different from the single-seaters of Formula 3.
Exactly, yeah.
As you mentioned, the Super GT series attracts top-level drivers from around the world, including those from Formula 1 and 24 Hours of Le Mans. The sport is not only popular in Japan, but also captivates millions of fans globally.
Yeah.
For those who might not be familiar with the sport, can you give us a super high-level overview of the Super GT series?
Yeah.
How does it work, and what are the key rules and aspects that make it unique?
Well, Super GT is a very unique series, because, as I mentioned before, so it has GT 500 and GT 300s. So the 500s are basically a one-of-a-kind racing car made with the ultimate components, lightweight, all carbon fiber, down to the last bolt of the car. It's just I think the closest car to Super GT would be the German DTM, which then they kind of reshaped the series, and it became a GT3 series now, which is similar to what we have in GT300 in Japan. So you have these GT500s, which are basically prototype cars with a roof, and then the GT300s, which we then race with the GT3 cars, and a few Japanese-made cars, which we call the JAF GT cars. They fit into the same class, and the GT500s then are their own class. And so we have in total about 42 cars or so in the series. And so the races are always full of drama, lots of things happening, and it's just really entertaining. I think that's what grabs people's attention around the world. You never know what's going to happen. That's always, a lot happening in these races, and it's just a lot of excitement.
Also, if I'm not mistaken, the GT races use a rolling start to begin the race, whereas Formula employs a standing start with cars remaining stationary on the grid until the green flag signals the start. In Super GT, the cars start moving before the race officially begins. How does this rolling start affect the race strategy and dynamics compared to a standing start?
Yeah. So these cars, the GT 500s, the GT 300s, they're like, let's say they're not very friendly cars when it comes to starts, from not moving starts, like if you're from standing start, because they have certain components that like in the clutch, for example, that won't like you doing those practice starts or doing starts in the race, and they wear out very quickly. So I think one of the reasons that we do moving starts is there. And there are, I think, some other elements, of touring car that usually touring car races are in moving. It's not only applied to GT, but also the prototype racing, like in Le Mans, you see the moving starts, and the IMSA in the US, which is also prototype racing, is also moving starts. So only Formula One really you have, like standing starts, and the lower formulas as well. So I think mostly in Formula car racing you have standing starts, and then in touring car you have the moving starts. It's just a different characteristic of a slightly different approach. Obviously, when it's a standing start, you can make a little bit more of a difference because you can be faster at the reaction, and you can also be better at picking up traction out of the line. So on a moving start, there is less space for errors.
Was the transition from Formula 3 to Super GT difficult for you?
Yes, a little bit, because you go from driving Formula your whole life, from driving a car that is very lightweight, high downforce, you drive very aggressive. Formula cars are made to drive very aggressively, but a GT car, you have to kind of feel it more because it's a heavier car, doesn't have as much downforce as a Formula car. So, you have to be aware of things that are happening, but in a different level. In a Formula car, you have your own seat that's molded to your body. So you're basically part of the car. Everything, your body is almost a sensor of what's happening to the car. In a GT car, you're basically in a seat that is also going to fit your teammate, because in a GT racing, there's always 2 or 3 drivers per car. This happens in the Nürburgring 24 hours, or Le Mans 24 hours, or in all kinds of GT racing. We're sharing the car with a teammate. So you got to compromise a little bit here and there on your seat position, or how to be so comfortable in the car. But that's one of the challenges of driving a GT car. And then it's different in terms of setting it up, and understanding a GT car is very different from a Formula car. You have to use different approach to setting up the car, because the Formula car is more based on downforce level, and you can it's all about maximizing downforce. A GT car will be more mechanical grip setup. So you're gonna work much more suspension and so on.
Also, just to clarify, the race distance in Super GT events is typically around 300 kilometers per race.
Yeah, we have some races that are 300 kilometers. Some other races are 350. So it just varies through the season. We have different distances.
How often do you change drivers during a race? Is it synchronized with refueling or tire changes, or is there a specific strategy you follow for driver swaps?
The driver change is usually made, so we have the fuel window, which in a normal, under normal circumstances, it takes about an hour. So the car can run for about an hour, and then it will come to do a pit stop, and then we do driver change, tire change, and refueling. And then in some races we can do, occasionally I can do a double stint, which I then stay in the car, no driver change. Whenever the race has 3 stints, for example, then sometimes I'm able to just stay in the car and do a second stint.
That means that you're basically out there on the race circuit for almost 2 hours straight.
Yeah. So, the GT3 cars, we have AC, so we have air conditioning. Obviously the air conditioning is not as effective as, it's not fantastic cooling, but it does help. And then we're drinking through the race as well, so you're hydrating, and But yeah, you get busy behind the steering wheel. You're moving a lot. It's intense inside the car, so it does get hot. But I think.
So what do you do if you need to pee during a race? Is there a way to manage this situation, like using a small bottle or something similar while you're in the car?
You don't have time. You don't have time. Even if you have a long straight, you don't have time to focus on anything else. If it's really urgent, you just let it go. And but I think it happened to me only once in my career that I had to pee in the car, but it's not very pleasant.
I can imagine it's quite challenging. In cycling, for instance, riders sometimes face similar situations where they need to manage natural breaks. Some riders might even relieve themselves while still rolling with the help of a teammate pushing them if necessary. It's not common, but when you got to go, you gotta go.
Exactly.
Similar in motorsports, managing these needs is part of maintaining peak performance, I assume. We have also talked to cycling sports directors, the directeurs sportifs on the Castelli podcast, who deal with similar issues doing long races like Milano-San Remo, Paris-Roubaix, Tour of Flanders, those days where they have to sit like 6-7 hours in the car. They often have to manage their hydration carefully because there aren't many opportunities for natural breaks during those long days in the car.
Yeah.
It sounds like both motorsports and cycling share some common strategies for handling these situations here.
Yeah.
JP, how crucial is the relationship between drivers and their engineers?
Yeah, I think the connection with the engineer and the confidence to work together are like one of the most important elements of racing, because you're constantly working on the car. Every session, free practice, qualifying, in the race, you're always making little adjustments. So if you're working with someone who sort of connects with you and your ideas, because when you're an experienced driver, you already sort of have ideas about what to do in the car and what you want to do. You know the response, where the response is going to come from and how it's going to affect the balance of the car. So working with someone that basically agrees your ideas and kind of synchronizes with you just really makes things more easy. And so on that side, it's, I think, very important to have confidence to working with your engineer. Exactly.
And that relationship, and then also with the other drivers, how many drivers are usually on one team doing such a long event?
So in Super GT, for example, we can have 2 or 3 drivers per car, which is the same that it's in general, like, in the prototype racing and GT racing, usually 2 to 3 drivers per car. Only when you go into like very long distance races, like 24 hours of Le Mans, for example, then there will be 3 to 4 drivers.
Doing a race, how long does it typically take to complete the event? And what is the average speed you maintain throughout the race?
Well, I mean, it varies from track to track, but like the race that we just done at Fuji last weekend, I think we averaged like 180 something kilometers per hour. It's just, it's a decent average for a 350 kilometer race.
In Super GT, it's often not clear who will win until the very end.
Yeah.
As races can be incredibly close. Mental toughness is crucial in any elite sport, but especially in motorsports. How do you stay mentally strong and handle the pressure of competing at such high level, especially over long distances?
Well, I think it's this only comes down to your confidence, to your to the amount of confidence that you the belief you have in yourself. There are lots of different situations in car racing. Be it sometimes different changing track conditions like dry to wet, wet to dry, where if you're not sharp, if you're not on top of your game, it can catch you. It can catch, and from one moment to another, you can spin out or you can crash and so on. So yeah, it's I think it's a balance, and it's being comfortable with yourself. That's the most important. Knowing what you're capable of to be mentally strong, and I think mostly focus on what you are doing and not looking around too much. Because when you're car racing, one of the things that dictates car racing is just the time board. So you're always looking at a screen and seeing how fast you are compared to others. And it can be really challenging sometimes to improve 1 or 2 tenths on a lap time around the track. So if you're focusing only on the time difference, it might be difficult. But if you focus on the little things that can be improved on the car, if you pay attention to those details, then you will naturally improve. So I think it's sort of you kind of have to take a parallel route sometimes and not just look at the main indicator, which is going to be the lap time. You're like, if you focus on that, that's tough, because you have to find a way to get there. It's just not like, okay, I can find 2 tenths, but it's very tricky, because if you find 2 tenths, you can just outdo yourself a lot of times, because you're on the edge, you're trying, you're pushing all the limits. And if you just lock up the tires by trying to brake 2-3 meters later than usual, you go straight into the corner, and then you missed half a second, then you missed, you gave up all the time then. So so it's a fine line, that we're always dealing with the smallest of margins.
Look, at cycling today,
Exactly.
Every little margin counts. We focus on every aspect to optimize performance, from aerodynamics to comfort and nutrition. Compared to 20 or 30 years ago, today cyclists are leaner and more disciplined. They often avoid alcohol, and the emphasis has shifted from quantity to quality in training.
Yeah.
And that's very similar to motorsports, which demand the same level of dedication. Just like cyclists, drivers live and breathe their sport year-round, including the off-season, as they prepare for the next season.
Yeah.
There are many overlapping similarities in the commitment required for both sports, I think.
Yeah. But, as just adding to the point that you're making, I mean, what I find fascinating about cycling is that, the engine is your body, and you can push yourself as hard as you want going in training. Obviously, you need a certain training program, you need some structure to make improvements. But it's down to you, it's down to your dedication, and you can do it almost anytime, really, as a cyclist. Car racing is on the opposite. I mean, is very different in that respect, because when you go testing, when you go practice, you need to book a racing track. You need to have, marshals working there. You need the race team to bring the car, to have the tires. You need to order tires. You need to have all the equipment, which makes it, a lot more challenging. And that's why we don't have as much testing and preparation or practice compared to cycling. As in cycling, you can do it every day. So that's one of the things that I really enjoy, is to be able to go out there every day and then challenge myself, be it in a little section where I know what time I can do, by hunting down Strava KOMs somewhere. So I think that is really cool, that you can, you can, in cycling, you can really feel yourself and how much you're able to improve day to day.
That's very true. As you reflect on a long and successful career, do you think there could be a future for you in cycling once you hang up your race car helmet? Is it a sport you might continue to practice, or are there aspects of the cycling world you would like to explore further?
I wish I could go back a few years in time, to be honest, to do that. But our bodies don't like I would say, when you're going into late 40s or 50s, I think it just it becomes more challenging in some ways, especially in terms of recovery. Yeah, you can just feel it. But I love cycling. I love competing, and I love improving myself. And I think those are things that are always going to keep me on a bike. As long as I can, I will be cycling. I think it's a lifestyle. It teaches you so much. It teaches you discipline. It teaches you resilience. It teaches you to never give up. It teaches you to stand pain. It teaches you to be patient, to pace yourself, and all those things are things that you might not even be conscious of it, but you might be applying that to other parts of your life. I noticed in myself, since I started cycling, quite many changes, in my lifestyle, and how much more I respect my rest time, because you do need to rest if you want to gain, if you want to make improvements. Rest is one of the key things. So
because how often do you actually get to ride your bike during a normal week?
Well,
let's say a week where you do not have any car race events on the weekend.
I try to ride 6 times a week if I'm not racing on the weekend. So I do, normally on the weekdays, I do 2-hour rides in the morning, which amounts to about 70 kilometers in the morning. In Tokyo, we have a place where we can ride. It's very easy to ride there because it's along the river path. It's called the Arakawa. It's very flat and just along the river, beautiful path. So I can go there and do structure workouts if I want, and so on. And on the weekends, then I try to get out of Tokyo and then go into, the countryside and ride the mountains, do some climbing, and different.
Riding your bike 6 days a week is almost like a full-time job for a professional rider.
Yeah. I mean, I think I do, in the last 3 years or so, I've been doing an average of 500 to 600 kilometers a week distance. It's a good amount.
That's a significant amount of riding. I mean, for an average amateur cyclist, covering that distance in a week would be typical.
Yeah.
The motto eat, sleep, cycle certainly applies, and being serious about it means integrating gym work to strengthen your core, as sitting behind a wheel can be demanding on your body. You also need to recover properly and stay in close contact with your team, the marshals and engineers. With so much on your plate each week, it must be refreshing to have those 2 to 3 hours on the bike per day just to unwind, exploring new places and detach from the daily stress.
Yeah, I do, especially in the city, like in riding in Tokyo, I think it's the best time to ride is early in the morning. And that's what I found out because, you don't want to deal with too much car traffic and so on, because Tokyo is a big city. So I try to ride as early as possible. So I get up, sometimes just before 5, and I'm riding. I'm on the road like around 5, between 5:15 to 5:30, 8 a.m. And then I start my day.
So what time do you usually go to bed in the evening to ensure you get a full 8 hours of sleep? And how do you manage your schedule to balance rest with your training and racing commitments?
Yeah, I would say that I usually don't get the 8 hours. I go to bed like around 10 or maybe just before that, which then if I'm waking up at 4:30, because I need to eat something just before I leave, be it like an oatmeal or something. And so I'm in bed. I try to be in bed by 10. And then if I'm up at 4:30, that's 6.5 hours of sleep. And that's the best I can do with my schedule.
It's true that everyone's sleep needs are different. And if you're used to waking up early, you might not need as much sleep as 8 hours.
Yeah.
When you're out on the bike, do you use cycling as a way to connect with your fans on a more professional level? I mean, unlike motorsports, where fans often can't get close to their idols, cycling allows for more direct interactions. Have you had any experience where fans recognized you while you were out riding, or do you find opportunities to engage with them during your rides?
Like occasionally in Tokyo, it happened like a few. I think because I've been very active on social media about my cycling, because I really enjoy to just update here and there on stories and stuff about what I'm doing on cycling. So a few fans connected to me that way.
It's cool to hear about those interactions. I can imagine that being recognized while riding, much like Pogacar and Geraint Thomas in the mountains above Monaco, can be a mix of enjoyable and occasionally overwhelming, especially if it interrupts a planned training session or fans hunting you down for a selfie.
But when you're out and like in a mountain and so on, that's usually that doesn't happen anymore. It happened a few times in Tokyo. But I don't think many car racing fans that don't know I'm cycling would recognize me when they see me with a cycling helmet and the sunglasses. Are like, that's a bet, yeah.
Now coming into my next question about muscular necks. I mean, they're a distinctive feature of race car drivers. I read somewhere that they experience around 4G doing braking, 5 to 6Gs doing acceleration, and up to 8-9Gs doing cornering. And they might even have to tolerate that load for 5-6 seconds at a time. So I imagine building up those muscles is essential. But how do Super GT and Formula drivers train for the extreme G-forces they experience on the track?
Yeah, G-forces is something that, you kind of, you don't really train for it because you can't really, there's nowhere really you can, you do neck training, for example, which helps you kind of, support yourself. Obviously, core is very important, but we're so attached to, the seat is basically, in a Formula car, the seat is molded to your body. So, and then you have, those like 6-point seat belt, which basically you don't move an inch when you're driving. You're basically, you're part of the car. That's what you are. So the force you mainly feel on the helmet, because the helmet has a little bit of weight. So when you're braking, your head tends to kind of go forward and accelerate, but the helmet will have a support on the back. On the lateral side, there's a little bit of wiggle room like on both sides. So obviously, the drivers need to move their heads to do things inside the car and sometimes, look elsewhere. So, but you just, for training, really, it's just, it's a lot of practice driving. I think as you do that for some time, you just get used to it, Of course, after if you don't drive a race car for a long time and you suddenly drive a very quick high downforce car and you go into high speed corners, you're immediately going to feel it. And it can take your breath away a little bit because you're using a lot of your power, a lot of your core, and you can hold your breath sometimes just because you're tense too.
Yeah, that makes sense, what you're saying. But I also thought it would be something that would involve hanging weights from your neck or pulling on a resistance band, to simulate the lateral forces.
Basically there's some workouts where you basically wear a belt around your head, and that belt is strapped to the weights, and you're doing neck exercises, which then I would say that's the closest thing you can get to the G-force that you're getting inside the race car, that just trains your neck to stay stable, because sometimes especially when you're doing high speed corners, and I'm talking more Formula car racing. GT racing is a little less than that, but with Formula car racing, if you don't have a strong posture, a strong core, a strong neck, you may struggle to keep, especially with the weight of the helmet adding to that, then you may be losing a little bit of the strength there. And then to balance, and especially focusing on something while you're balancing on top of an inflatable ball in front of the mirror, for example. So those are car racing specific workouts.
But you also get used to the sensation and training your neck over those many years that you're racing, from when you're a kid starting in go-karting and up to going professional.
Yeah, obviously, like when you're, it's a series of adaptations, because you're going from the lower levels of, car racing, because you start go-karting, and then you go to Formula 4, Formula 3, Formula 2, Formula 1. And then every stage, everything is just getting, faster, everything is getting sharper, everything is getting, more intense. And obviously the G-forces are higher everywhere, except like when you actually a go-kart, a really fast go-kart, we say that a fast go-kart is the closest that you get to Formula 1, because in a go-kart, you're really close to the ground, and the track is small, and the feeling of speed is actually faster than you would have in like a Formula 4 car. Because in a Formula 4, you're in a big track, like you're in a Formula 1 car, but then, things kind of move a bit slower compared to a go-kart track. So in a go-kart track is like reaction time, and everything else is just, it goes so much faster. So for a lot of Formula 1 drivers, they will drive go-karts just to keep their sharpness, to keep, to make sure that they're looking at the right places and work their reflexes and stuff like that.
Do you work with a nutritionist or a physiotherapist to stay in peak condition for both car racing and cycling? I mean, similar to what professional cyclists have.
I don't work with a nutritionist or physio. So on the car racing, I think we're quite relaxed in that sense. There is not a follow-up from the race teams as much as there is in other sports like cycling, or I would say like if you're in a team sport like soccer, for example, I guess you have doctors following up and everything. But in car racing, it's more about the self-discipline, self-training that, a lot of drivers do. They do what they want to do. They do simulation. They do a lot of, some drivers have car simulators at home and do that and so on.
So they have real professional simulators at home. Wow.
Yeah, I used to have it, but it's just it takes a lot of space. So and then that's the problem. You gotta have basically a room dedicated for it.
I can imagine that every kid, especially boys, dreamed of racing cars when they were young. Many of us have spent hours playing video games, fantasizing about being behind a steering wheel of a real race car. But having your own racing simulation set up at home add a whole new level of excitement and immersion.
Yeah, it's so realistic these days, and you can really get the feedback from the car. When you drive current simulators, like you really can work on similar aspects of things that we're doing, similar things on terms of set up the car and so on. So it's really fascinating, and you can race online with other people. It's just like Zwift, so you can get into rooms with, especially during COVID, there were like a massive group of racing drivers that some of us were not racing because the series had a pause and so on. And so we used to get online and race a number of like sometimes 30 to 40 drivers racing in the same room with sometimes weird cars. We used to like race buggies or tractors and then just crash into each other. But that was, a way to sort of have fun, and because everybody was at home. So yeah.
It's great to stay connected with racing in a virtual way, just like many of us do with esports platforms like Swift.
Exactly.
Returning to the nutrition topic, I would have expected that a professional nutritionist would be part of a motorsports team to help manage the driver's diet, ensuring they would avoid compressed foods and other things that could slow down your brain function and affect your reaction times and stuff. I mean, it seems like such support would be crucial for maintaining peak performance.
I think, when you're talking about maybe Formula One, then I guess there would be some kind of follow-up on that. But, on our side, and I think I don't really know any other race car drivers that are working, with nutritionists. I would say the most important is maintaining your weight, because normally you have a weight that at most times you have to be a certain weight because the car, you can add weight or you can reduce weight depending on the driver's weight. You have a regulation that you have to be a weight with the car. So usually you have to maintain a certain weight during the year or so on. But that's about it.
As a professional athlete, you already know how to maintain a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah.
You understand the importance of eating the right foods and staying away from fast food and ultra-processed options. Your lifestyle and experience ensure that you naturally make the right choices to stay healthy and perform at your best.
Absolutely, yeah. I think that's the most important, is really understanding your body. Like I try not to eat any like processed foods, fried foods, no junk food. I don't eat much compressed food as you mentioned. So it's mostly about foods that are rich in vitamins and fruits and salads and vegetables, and I like to eat. I eat a lot of rice, which helps. With training, gives you a lot of energy. And meats, I usually try to eat very lean meat.
Right.
So
you're already ticking all the boxes when it comes to doing the right things. As you mentioned earlier, starting your day with an oatmeal porridge, which we all know is the champion's breakfast, plus living in a country with such a fantastic food culture must make it easier to maintain a healthy and enjoyable lifestyle and diet.
You're right. Yeah, actually, Japan is, and for anyone that's listening and has ridden in Japan, they will know exactly what I'm talking about. Japan is a real paradise for cyclists, because you go out into the mountains or into the countryside, and every 2, 3, 5 kilometers, you will find convenience stores with everything you can imagine. And you have, onigiris, which are like little rice bowls. You have fruits, you have juices, you have coffee, you have everything, sandwiches, and even like ready-made meals, like you can eat like they just microwave it, like some pasta or
you get to enjoy delicious, freshly prepared meals rather than just reheating overcooked dishes.
Exactly.
It's great to have access to such flavorful and nutritious food.
Exactly, yeah. And as I was mentioning earlier, like one of the things you can do here is travel. And this is one of the things you can do. You don't really need to carry a lot of stuff, because you can plan your route and stop at certain places, and of course convenience stores and hotels where you have everything. Like literally, like I've done trips in Japan which I forgot things which were essential, but just go to the convenience store in the corner and you have everything there. You have socks, you have t-shirts, you have underwear, you have umbrellas, you have you have winter gloves, you have everything you need. If you want to ride in the winter and if you forget your gloves, you go to a convenience store and you get awesome winter gloves to ride.
Right, yeah, they have everything you could want. After we wrap up this episode, which we're about to do since we have been chatting for quite a while, the first thing I'm going to do is going to look for a good deal on a flight ticket to Japan. I promise you, I'll be coming this autumn or spring to visit this beautiful country.
Please do, because Yeah, I mean, especially if we can plan this out. Like I know, I mean, there is a few places that that are awesome to go, especially in the fall, because you get the different colors, you get the it's just stunning. So I think I hope that when you plan, then I'll be available so that we can, go out for some nice rides.
Wow, that would be fantastic, JP. Autumn is a great time of the year and your season is winding down, but don't you still have a few races left in November?
Yeah, I have my last race of the year is the second week. The first week of November. Yeah, we are a little busier in the second half of the season. Until now, we had 4 races, but now we have a race every 2 to 3 weeks, almost.
Okay, yeah.
So we just had the big summer break.
One last question about cycling and car racing. While the two sports are different, they still have a lot of things in common. Does your instinct for grip and feeling for handling translate to cycling, especially on wet, humid roads?
Yeah, I think obviously there's a lot of connection there, and there's a lot of knowledge that you can use from car racing into that. I mean, approaching corners, sometimes what kind of surface has more grip than others. These are things that are coming naturally to us, and obviously the lines, tire pressures are important. So you know the things that are going to make a difference, and but obviously ultimate comes down to practice and skill and so on. So yeah, I mean. And I think, descending is, basically it's something that tells a lot about the rider, a lot about your personality and how much you can really put on the line. And you see guys that, they can really risk so much descending, and they make it look easy, but it's not. If you go out there on a bike and you're going at full speed like the pros are doing, and some of the stages in the tour, especially the one where Pogačar managed to distance Vingegaard at the very last couple kilometers off the climb, and then he was bombing down that descent on the other side. And the first part of the descent where Galibier, and that first part of the descent where Vingegaard was keeping the gap, you could see it was a more technical part of the descent, right? That was really amazing to watch both of them, because they were putting everything on the line, and if any of them had crashed at that point, that could be game over for both of them in the race, because the speeds there were just insane, right?
It was insane, yeah.
So, and it was also half wet, a little bit damp and so on. So you have to improve your sensors to another level to make sure that you don't overcook those corners. You using the right brakes also, because I think anyone who's a good descender knows that. I mean, if you're not using much front braking into corners, because that can really can catch you cornering. So it was really impressive to watch, and I think that tells a lot about those riders. And obviously, later in that descent, it became a little bit more flat and a little bit more about power, and then that's where Pogačar was distancing Vingegaard, where it became more favorable to his physique and to his.
You're absolutely right. Just like Pogačar and Pidcock demonstrated with their incredible descending skills, like Pidcock's masterclass on stage 12 of the 2022 Tour de France, coming down the other side of the Galibier, the feeling and instinct you develop in race car driving can translate to the cycling.
Yeah.
It's like being one with the bike or car. The way riders flow through corners and choose their lines, feeling integrated with their machine. is very similar to what we see in motorsports.
Yeah.
The connection and instinct you develop in one can certainly reflect in the other.
Yeah, exactly that. When you're feeling that like you're connected to the bike and you're confident and you're using your body weight in the right ways and all of that, and you're smooth at the same time. And I think smoothness is something that is very, very important when descending. When you're you're making sure that every little movement is just precise and everything is working and you're understanding and feeling what the surface is giving you. Because if you're not feeling that, and if you're just a little unconfident, that can be a big difference between going fast and either going slow or also crashing.
Exactly, game over. JP, it's been fantastic having you on the show. I promised that we would keep it under 60 minutes, but we have been chatting for a lot more than that. But it's been an absolutely pleasure. I would love to do a second episode with you later, maybe this winter. Yeah. If we meet up in Japan, we could even do it in person, perhaps go for a bike ride together. Yeah, that would be awesome. I would really enjoy that.
I would love that too, Soren. So there's a lot to talk about, a lot of connections between car racing and cycling. I think those are like two worlds where they're on wheels, and we're certainly connected in many ways.
Exactly, and I think that's a great way to wrap up this episode of the Castelli podcast with you. Before we finish, I have one last question.
Yeah.
How many bikes do you have in your garage?
Actually, I'm picking up a new one this week, which is, as you have noticed here, I have a Specialized T-shirt, and I'm lucky enough to be an ambassador for Specialized here in Japan, and then I get a few nice bikes. So I have I'm picking up my second SL8, and I have an SL7. I have one Epic, which is a mountain bike. I have a Shiv TT disc, which is sometimes I do like to ride TT. And I have a Tarmac SO6 as well. So
that's 5 bikes in total.
Yeah.
What size frame are you?
I'm a 52.
Perfect. My size. I don't even have to bring my bike to Japan then.
You don't.
I'm sure I can borrow one of yours.
You can definitely do it, yeah.
Perfect. That's awesome. One last question though. I've been curious about this since we started this interview. What's the story behind that beautiful artwork you have behind you?
Yeah, so this is it's a reproduction of you see the whole car.
Nice.
And so this is a reproduction of my race GTR. It's a steel frame, and it has 2 stars here because I won 2 championships. My name there. It was customized by a German company that shipped over to Japan for me.
So to our podcast listeners on Spotify and Apple Podcast, I strongly encourage you to watch the end of this episode on YouTube. The artwork we're discussing is a real piece of art, especially beautiful and worth seeing. So jump over to our YouTube channel to watch this interview.
Yeah, it's very cool. Yeah, they're also they're doing some kind of artwork with racetracks. So if you like racetracks, if you have a car that is attached, you're emotionally attached to, you can make that. They customize whatever you like.
Nice. JP, thank you so much for joining us. I know it's getting late where you are. By the way, what time is it over there?
It's 7:30 now here in Tokyo.
That's dinner time.
Yeah, it's dinner time, but I'm just I've got a bunch of options around me, so I'm always prepared to make quick decisions for dinner, and as some great food around me, as we were talking about. So I'm looking forward. I might go out and grab some sushi.
Oh man, you're making me so jealous. Enjoy the rest of your evening, buddy, and thanks again for joining us.
Yeah.
Let's definitely keep in touch, and best of luck for the remainder of the season.
Yeah, thank you very much, Soren. I appreciate that. And thanks to everyone tuning in.
Thank you, JP. Take care. Bye-bye.
Yeah, you too. Take care. Yeah.
If you enjoyed this episode and found it inspiring and interesting, you can always head over to YouTube to watch some Super GT videos or get yourself a membership so you can watch them live on the weekends. If you enjoyed this episode, please make sure to subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. Give us a review or 5-star rating to help us reach more cyclists through the algorithm. And also, if you would like to suggest a future podcast topic or have any product-related questions, just shoot us a line at podcast@castellicycling.com or connect with us on social media. I hope you enjoyed this episode, and I hope to see you again in 2 weeks. Until then, take care and ride safe.